we can get started. All right, let's go for it. This is me, in case you need to get in touch with me, have questions after I've confused you and you've walked away and said, wait a second, what was that again? You will receive the slides. Actually, you'll receive also the recording. Shane puts that all together for us and sends it out to everyone who registered. So I'm very happy about that. And you can get in touch with us. Before we also get started, notice that this month and next month, we're really tackling, focusing in on communication skills. And next month, my colleague Rick Murdoch will be presenting about strategic communication, challenging the way we think about our interactions. And so this will be a real treat for you. That will be coming up October 29th. It's hard to believe it's almost October. We are here. It's a beautiful fall day. Oh, a nice warm fall day too. And maybe it will be on October 29th. Who knows? But tune in for Strategic Communication by my colleague Rick Murdoch, and the link for that will be out quite soon. There we go. All right. I want to also tell you about something exciting. We've been announcing this for the past couple of off the shelves, but we are live with a new program called Fast Track. These we have a YouTube channel for this, and they're 5 minutes or less, little video snippets just on specific detailed skills that may help you as a supervisor or a leader. And that this slide here has those links for you. And right now we're still building it, but we have, I know, more than half a dozen little snippets there for you to take advantage of. So be sure to visit that website. All right, so balancing empathy and accountability. That's what we're talking about today. And for good reason. It's called the manager's dilemma for a good reason. How do you extend empathy, and how far do you extend it before it seriously starts to compromise your work and your mission? Adding salt to that wound, sometimes you have made a sincere or an empathic decision, and you realize that you may have contributed to the start of an employee's pattern of poor performance and behavioral obstacles. So now all of a sudden you're feeling some feelings of guilt, maybe some resentment, when you recognize that the generosities that you may have extended have contributed to this poor performance. So this is always a topic we hear a lot about, and folks ask us quite a bit, those on our team, quite a bit about this topic. Now, sometimes it's tempting to continue to dismiss the ongoing and errant behavior, especially when we have contributed to it to some degree, or that some of those feelings of guilt, right? We're hoping that if we just ignore it, it will stop, or we don't want everyone to realize it was all our fault, which it isn't. But how do you confront a behavior that you may have initially misunderstood or even unintentionally encouraged? So as a manager, you might recognize that others on your team see what's going on also, and consequently, working relationships can become strained when we're having difficulty holding people accountable, where we're not sure what to do there. So we have pressure and stress that get displaced. What can you do? What can you do in these situations? So these are the questions that we're going to address today. And the same principles apply not only in our professional world, but also our personal relationships. And that can be with other colleagues, with peers, family, friends, teenage children, and virtually all human beings, okay? So let's start with a little bit of a mind shift. This slide is not much of a mind shift here. If your experience is anything like mine, when you first heard or came to the concept of accountability and it was first introduced to you, it was a scary word. Initially, I experienced accountability as a punitive concept that was, always lurking, waiting to assign blame when things went wrong. Like, who's accountable for this? What failures or weaknesses caused this? Now, if this is your experience too, You're not alone. There was a recent study that involved over 40,000 participants in the American workforce. I'm going to refer to that study a couple times today. It was just released in March of this year. And the research, this is startling, found that 80% of respondents in that survey said that feedback only occurs when things go wrong. An even larger number are inclined to associate accountability with some sort of negative connotation. So yeah, we've got some issues to deal with there, and we're not alone in this. So if you've had any of these feelings, you're right there with everyone else. Okay. Get ourselves to move on here. So we might ask ourselves, is accountability the opposite of empathy, right? These seem to be two competing ideas. And especially if you had the concept that I had initially about accountability and empathy, we might conclude that at the very least, they must be at odds with one another. And that doesn't have to be. That really doesn't have to be. Accountability and empathy can get along just fine if we implement effective approaches. I'm going to assume that you're listening today because you're an empathic leader who wishes to explore how to keep accountability balanced with your empathic instinct. So we're going to have hopefully a few things that you can bite on here and integrate into your practice. Now, to kind of get us centered in this, I want to use a metaphor. Right here, you see a common pipe cleaner. Maybe you have used these in various crafts and so on. If you poke yourself or someone else with the end, it's a lot sharper than the fuzzy side might lead you to perceive. The package that I have with these pipe cleaners actually comes with a warning label. Imagine, so it's caution, sharp objects, handle with care. Poke your eye out with a pipe cleaner, right? So imagine this as exercising accountability without empathy. As much as you might coat it with these nice furry chenille things there, what are they? The little filaments, right? As much as you might do that, there is still a sharp end there. On the other hand, if you brush up on a person with a fuzzy chenille side, it's really soft and rather inconsequential. You probably don't remember anyone rubbing up against you with a pipe cleaner. It's not a memorable experience, right? This is empathy without accountability. So if we bend the obscuring the sharp ends, now we have a more useful tool. It can get our attention if we were to poke someone or ourselves with that softer end, but there is some force and it doesn't have the piercing jolt. So we can combine these, both of these, and they can work hand in hand. All right. I have to do a little plug here because a lot of what I'm drawing from today comes from this book, Crucial Accountability. And that's it's widely available. It might be helpful if you wish to dig a little deeper. Obviously, we have less than what 45 minutes together today, and then that's not as much as this book will cover. Additionally, my colleagues and I on DHRM's Leadership and Organizational Development team are certified trainers for the classroom course of Crucial Conversations for Accountability. And if you and your team would like to learn a little bit more about this 2-day course, you can contact any one of us, or you can contact our group email there, which is lod@utah.gov, and we'll be happy to provide you more information on that. So Crucial Conversations, they have a lot of components, and we're going to keep it simple because we just have our 45 minutes, right? We're going to discuss just 4 skills today that that you can incorporate into your supervisory discussions. And these skills are going to weave together empathy and accountability, just like the pipe cleaner metaphor that I just shared here. The first skill is starting with heart. And we might ask, well, why do we start here? Because starting with accountability can strike a lot of fear. There's no feeling of safety yet, and accountability is the fruit that you're looking for. It's the result that you want to arrive at. Start there, right? We've got to start with heart. So first, we're going to seek to connect with the individual.
So what we've got is break path.
Someone off mute. Okay, no problem. First, we'll seek to connect with the individual, because you can't influence a without a connection, right? Too many of our conversations these days are focused on, making a point or landing some kind of zap, right? And we want to be heard, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of listening going on. And hey, also, this is not about getting nice or being nice, right? Connection requires sincerity. In order to do this, I suggest you have to start with your intent. What is it that you really want? It usually requires a moment of us stepping back a little bit, where you need to stop and think, do some introspection, and this can be done in a moment, but it's probably even more helpful to identify before you even engage in the conversation, right? Let's start there. Start on your own time. Now, this is not, I want to make it clear that this is not where you try to figure out how to deliver criticism or bad news in a way to make it seem more palatable. That when we do that, it's usually done by telling people what you think they want to hear up front, and then sort of awkwardly dumping some sort of corrective edict in between that, and then ending on a rather insincere note of positivity. It's actually insulting to most people, and it can wreck your credibility. So no. When I say start with heart, the first thing I'm suggesting here is to get yourself right first. Get your mind right first. Start with what's inside you, what your heart is telling you about the situation that you're encountering. So let's start here. Before you open your accountability conversation, what is it that you want? Now, check your answers on this. I want to point out that I advise using the word for. What is it that I want for rather than from? Now, for, the reason I say that is for delivers to something or something, to someone or something, right? If we're delivering it to them, it's more of a service-related word. While from, it implies that we're taking or extracting from someone or something. Now, that can be an appropriate term, but at this stage, remember, I'm challenging you to make a little mind shift here. We're laying a foundation for the connection that we need in order to work together. So here are a few questions I propose engaging in before you have your accountability conversation. What is it that I really want for me? What is it that I want for the other person? What is it that I want for our relationship, whether that's a personal or working relationship? And then finally, what is it that I want for my organization? If we can answer those questions, we know where to take our conversation, right? And we don't get sidetracked by making one of those sandwiches or something else, right? Now, if your answers to these feel a little off at first, that's okay. You might have to spend a little more energy with them. So for instance, if I simply want the impudent fool off my team, that may be more of a reflection of your frustration than your deeper intent. So dig deeper. Why would you want such a thing? Why do you want to have this conversation? What is it you think it will do for you? What is it you think it will do for them? What will it do for the team? This is getting to the root of what you really want. Do you want a cohesive team, a team that gets things done? What would people on that team do or behave like? Now, there's your expectation. And if that's not happening, then you have a gap between what is and what can be. I'm just kind of assuming that ridding your team of impudent fools is probably not an adequate performance expectation in itself, right? You're expected to do something a little more noble than that. So let's play with.
Just gonna switch interpreters real quick.
Okay, I will pause for a second.
Thank you.
We're going to play with an example here. And our supervisor, I don't really have a name for her, but it's the woman on the right. And Adam is the employee on the left. And we're going to play with this example for just a little bit here once we switch interpreters here. All right, we are ready to go? Okay, good. All right, so imagine our supervisor says here, you're confronting Adam about an employee, and to put yourself in her shoes, it's a disruptive pattern. And she says, hey, Adam, I've noticed a pattern between us that I want to talk about. When I bring up a concern about a commitment you didn't follow through on, you often raise your voice and appear really defensive. And I'd like us to be able to discuss things in a way that both of us can feel heard and find a solution. But I'm wondering if I've done something that's provoking your response. Can you tell me how you see it? Okay, so there's a lot packed in to that statement. And we're going to spend a little time with this, and you'll get to see what she's actually saying here. Our supervisor recognizes that a communication pattern stands in the way of Adam's follow-through. Now, from the conversation I just shared, we don't really know. There are some details we don't know. We don't know how often Adam doesn't follow through. But the supervisor seems to be more concerned about the conversation pattern than Adam's follow-through. And that's what she decided to address with this conversation, right? So starting with heart, she may have answered our what do I really want questions as something like this, okay? What does she want for herself? Not to be attacked, right? What does she want for Adam? For Adam to be heard, or at least for Adam to feel heard, right? What does she want for the relationship, the supervisory relationship between her and Adam? It would be a productive conversation instead of a combative conversation. And then finally, what does she want for the organization? Of course, completed commitments. Right? So if she had answered those questions there, she has a really good grounding of where to start her conversation, and making sure that she stays rooted in that and not getting sidetracked into a lot of the conversational bits that can happen when people feel uncomfortable about a difficult conversation, right? All right, let's play the conversation again. We can dig it down a little bit, and I'm going to share the content of her, what our supervisor says. Because the supervisor has taken the time to explore her real intent, what she really wants, she is well equipped to have this conversation. And I want you to notice this time what the supervisor does as she initiates the conversation with empathy. And there are 3 parts here, and those bullet points right there are what I want you to listen for, right? Okay, so listen close to here. Does the supervisor express her intent? Does she identify the problem? And then does she leave room for Adam to respond? Those are the 3 parts that we're looking for. Express intent, identify the problem, leave room for what I'm going to call curiosity or discovery. Right? It's an invitation to learn more, find out what's going on underneath the surface instead of relying on assumptions. This is all part of starting with heart. So here we are. Hey, Adam, I've noticed a pattern between us that I want to talk about. When I bring up a concern about commitment, a commitment you didn't follow through on, you often raise your voice and appear defensive. I'd like us to be able to discuss things in a way that both of us can feel heard and find a solution. But I'm wondering if I've done something that's provoking your response. Can you tell me how you see it? Okay, can you see how the conversation here starts with context? So rather than just launch into an adversarial or an accusatory rant, our supervisor is starting with what she wants, her intent. She expresses that right here. I'd like us to be able to discuss things in a way that both of us can feel heard and find a solution. That's what she wants. She begins the conversation by naming that concern. Here it is. Here's the concern. I've noticed a pattern between us that I want to talk about. And this is what the pattern is, right? And she identifies that and names that. Additionally, she expresses some tentativeness. Rather than being accusatory, she leaves some room for Adam and even invites his input. Now, you might be thinking, but there are some problems that we've got to address. We've got to address some issues. And there will be time to talk about what I'm calling the content, which is the lack of follow-through, right? But she starts the conversation by expressing her intent, identifying the concern, and opening the conversation with curiosity. There's an adage that says people rarely become defensive about what you're saying. They become defensive because of why they think you're saying it. And when people feel unsafe, they often turn to silence or verbal violence. So that's happening. There's some misconception that's going on between you and your conversation partner. And a lot of what we're talking about today will help establish that before you get into that kind of a pattern, right? Now, there's a lot more to unpack here, and there are a lot of additional skills that you could deploy for delivering feedback and addressing perceptions that your conversation partner might voice. We're not dealing so much with conflict here. We're dealing with how to have and open this conversation, right? So there are some other principles, and we're going to stick to the more basic principles here today. So when we start with heart, we establish a measure of safety. Are we off and running? Let's go for it. Okay. Our next skill is CPR. Well, not that CPR. CPR is actually, the skill is really clarifying the gap, and identifying CPR is how we clarify that gap. Is this the start of it? It's really an acronym that stands for content, pattern, and relationship. So if you're having an accountability conversation, what kind of issue are you addressing? That's the first thing you got to figure out. Otherwise, you end up addressing everything under the sun, and the person that you're having the conversation, your conversation partner, walks away not quite sure what the issue may have been, right? So let's start there. Content is a single instance of a problem. So something went awry and that you need to address. You can have a content discussion there. Or perhaps you have a pattern. It's a recurring problem. This has happened numerous times, or some very similar pattern that you see happening over again. Or finally, we have the relationship, or how the problem might be affecting the working relationships with you, with team members, and so on. So let me back up a second and define what a gap is. I'm talking about clarifying the gap, and gaps aren't always problems, errors, or mistakes. They can be, and in most cases, that's when we realize we have to have an accountability conversation, right? And as we talked about earlier that I shared, the vast majority view the concept of accountability in a negative light. So the research that I shared before, the employees and managers revealed that 80% of them say feedback only occurs when things go wrong. Now, that's not necessarily so. It's not necessarily factual, but we know that 80% perceive that that's the only time that feedback occurs, right? And in this case, that perception becomes our reality that we're dealing with. So this is why we might classically think a gap involves something went wrong. But a gap can also be an opportunity. If you have ever been the recipient of a stretch assignment, let's say, you are being presented with a gap. Here's where you are. Here's where we think you can be. Right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that things have gone wrong in sense. Sometimes it's your performance is so stellar, we want to see you jump to the next level. And that can be a gap as well. So the idea is that a gap can be an opportunity, a condition, an idea, a responsibility that hasn't been realized yet as well. So I mentioned this before. It's the space between what is and what can be. And clarifying the gap urges a person to step up to new possibilities or confront new challenges, whether that is something brand new or correcting an errant pattern. So that's how that rolls. And now there's another one I want to draw attention to, since we're doing, it's the season of performance, new performance plans. We're closing in on the first quarter, right? Behavioral expectations. It should be well established in every employee's performance objectives. Those might also represent gaps needing to be filled, or an opportunity needing to be stepped into. So in essence, a gap can be a problem or an opportunity you wish to address with an individual. This is what that might look like in very simple terms, okay? Content, you missed a deadline. Pattern, you've missed several deadlines. And a relationship might be, because you've missed a number of deadlines, I'm questioning whether I can really rely on you. Okay? By pinpointing which of those conversations you need to have, you'll get at the heart of the real problem and avoid revisiting the same issues over and over. Right? You'll find it a lot easier to make it clear what I'm addressing with you is a pattern, or a one-shot issue that popped up, or the relationship that we want to have moving forward. Now, you're also going to save yourself and others from a whole lot of resentment and frustration if you're able to be clear on that. So identifying the CPR helps you move beyond the surface level or wandering discussions and address the underlying issues that, if left unresolved, will steadily undermine trust and your relationship. You might be perceptive enough to pick up that oftentimes when it's a missed deadline or a one content issue, if that's not a pattern, you oftentimes overlook that unless the impact of it was really great, right? So oftentimes we find ourselves as supervisors in the pattern conversation. We're like, oh wow, I saw it once and I didn't do anything about it, and I saw it a second time and I may not have done anything about it then either. Now it's become a pattern, and I really need to address it with this person, with this employee, and that's how we end up there. So it's okay if you wound up in that spot. You know the conversation that you need to have, but we have a place to go in our conversation now. Okay, when you've identified that your problem is either content, pattern, or relationship, you're ready for the second part of clarifying the gap, which is sharing with respect and honesty. Now, this involves sharing facts of the problem, then sharing your perception or your story, and then finally inviting your conversation partner to share. Now, it sounds pretty simple, but there are some things that get in the way, right? Now, I want you also to remember, notice that I said facts and then perception or your story. Your story, let's face it, most of us think that our story is factual, right? We think we have the facts, but that is not necessarily so. We can observe some facts objectively, and what we tell ourselves about the facts, that's our story. Okay, we'll get to that. So two of the most common mistakes I want you to avoid when we open up this conversation to share with respect and honestly, right? We can share facts, share story, ask other facts, or ask our conversation partner for their input as well. But oftentimes we drone on, and I'm really guilty of this. Whether you're attempting to soften the criticism, reduce the awkwardness, or my favorite, the one I always fall into, I just want to lay out every possible detail to you. That can be less than productive, right? Keep it simple. A second mistake is being brutally honest. Sometimes we hear folks describe this as, hey, I'm just telling it like it is. You know, there's always a way to be honest without being brutal. Brutality has a tendency to overshadow honesty. Honesty has nothing to do with being hurtful, mean, angry, or letting off steam. Being honest is about being clear, specific, sincere, and authentic. Some will feel this, the sting of honesty. It doesn't sugarcoat it, right? It can still hurt, but if you're clear, specific, sincere, and authentic, you're being fair. I believe that your respectful intention will pay dividends not only with the individual you're confronting, but with others who are in the circle of impact. It reflects your own character. Clarifying the gap can best be accomplished in a sequence of 3 steps. We'll cover these 3 steps. The first one is facts, right? I just shared that before. We have facts, we have story, and then we're going to circle around and get feedback and more input. We're going to exercise curiosity. So we start by sharing the facts, and those often come out in words like, you committed to this. I noticed that this happened. Or we agreed to this the last 3 times that did or did not happen. You told me this. I'm actually seeing that. Those kinds of things are the sharing of facts. That's how the sharing of facts sort of looks. Then we move on to story. Now, the stories come after the facts. Make sure you get these in order. Facts come first. Then it's your story. Stories are interpretations of the facts. If we were to start by sharing our story, our feelings, and our perceptions, it can be difficult for our conversation partner to understand. So for instance, let's say we start by telling someone they can't be trusted, which is our story conclusion. They can't determine where that's coming from. Even if we follow it with the facts, they are likely to be, or our conversation partner is likely to be stuck back at the initial accusation. We told them, we started the conversation by saying, you can't be trusted. And they become fixated on defending themselves. So the first thing is we lay out the facts. Then we say, this is how we're interpreting. And when you're sharing your story, remember that these are your perceptions. They're different from facts. And while facts can stand alone, they don't always paint in a complete picture. Their facts alone can be incomplete. So sharing your story helps your conversation partner see how the facts may have led you to come to your perception or your conclusion. When sharing your story, make sure you're using tentative language. And these here are just some of the ideas that come out. And you've probably used these before. Because of this, it leads me to conclude such. Or it seems to me this is happening. Or my perception is this. I'm beginning to wonder if. All of those things are rather tentative, right? So it's your story, and you don't have to. Let me back up. Make sure that you don't overstate your story. The only conclusion, or everybody knows that, or everyone on the team says this, but you don't seem to get it. Those kinds of things. You don't have to summon the universe to validate your perception or your story. Your story is valid in and of itself, as is the person that you're, as is your conversation partner's story, right? So you're just sharing your perception, and that comes after the facts so that they can understand how you got to where your story is. Now, finally, we do the ask. So we have facts, story, ask. So we add the curiosity element to our conversation. Remember that the goal of the conversation is dialogue. It's not a monologue. How many people do you know that have been told out of a problem? The goal here isn't to arrive at a gotcha. The goal here is to arrive at a shared story, a shared understanding of what the problem is, to recognize that. And sustainable solutions are anchored in people recognizing and internalizing the gap that you have shared with them, both in fact and in the perception or your story. So ideally, they can find their own way to close the gap. Sometimes they might need to ask for suggestions if they need some help. Here are a few additional points to consider when you're clarifying the gap. If you've determined that your conversation is about content, let's say it's a single instance, the facts will do. there's really probably not a lot of reason to belabor the conversation with stories. A big mistake happened, and you say, oh, but I think this means that, and maybe there's something inside you of your inner person, or it's a conflict, or you don't need all of that stuff. If it's a single instance, the facts will do. There's no reason to belabor the conversation. But if you're addressing a pattern, it can be appropriate to relate some examples of the pattern so the person can understand what you're seeing and how you came to that conclusion. That's part of your story. Describe the gap that you perceive between your expectation and what you've observed. Okay. Share enough facts, but avoid overwhelming your conversation partner. Avoid absolutes like always and never. And along that line, also avoid accusatory labels like because you're lazy, or you're careless, or irresponsible, or even inferring those kinds of things. They're just not really helpful. Right? Finally, watch your nonverbals, your tone and your body language. This is why we started with heart, because if you are solid on your intention for the conversation, that sincerity, it's going to show in your tone. It's going to show in your nonverbals. If you've got that right, this is going to be a lot easier. Our third skill is balancing the load. All right. We all have a metaphorical bucket, and it represents the bucket I'm going to use to represent our capacity to deal with stress. And some of our buckets might be smaller than others, but I'm going to guess that in most cases, we're all carrying buckets about the same size, but our buckets might be equipped to hold different stressors than others. So what burdens one person might bring joy and excitement to another. I'm here with you today. I enjoy this. I recognize that some of you would be terrified to be speaking to how many we got? 481 people, right? So what stresses one person might be different for another person, and we have to recognize that too. So sometimes our stress buckets begin to overflow and we simply can't handle it all. There's a lot coming at a person or at us. It's those moments when the big stressor hits that the bucket begins to overflow and an empathic accountability conversation might be needed. And when this happens, our tendency is in that moment might be to say, especially if you consider yourself a very empathic person, your tendency might be to say, how can I help you with that big, massive stressor that just came into your work life? Yet, fundamentally, you usually can't do much about that big, massive stressor. But here's the key. As the supervisor, you don't have to. What we need to do is try to help our conversation partner to recognize their own ways to get their overall stress level back down below the top rim of the bucket. That's where we can be helpful. All that said, there might be some things that you can consider doing to help balance the load, to help this person balance their own load, right? Here's one. Can you adjust the volume of stressors? So let me give you an example. On let's say a team with diverse expertise, one person might be able to perform 3 particular tasks more effectively and in less time than their teammate can perform the same task once. Maybe there's an assignment trading opportunity there. If it's a development opportunity, then you may want to take some of those other smaller stressors off. And that's our second one. Can you remove or delay smaller stressors to prioritize larger ones? Our next one. Can you simplify expectations or maybe offer more clarity and insight? Sometimes people are feeling stressed because they're not quite clear on what the directive is or what the parameters are. And that can cause a great deal of stress. If you can alleviate some of that by simplifying the expectations or creating more clarity, that's going to be very helpful to you and to them. Can you extend some deadlines? Sometimes we make deadlines, and I know for myself, I set those deadlines and I'm pulling out my hair sometimes, and I realize, wait a second, I arbitrarily set that deadline for myself, or it's good to have a deadline to work toward, but perhaps I need to adjust given the circumstances or the conditions that have presented themselves. And finally, can you offer additional tools or resources that will reduce the burden? So remember, your job is not to fix everything. You're coming in to try to rescue the day or fix everything. That's not empathy, right? That's not what we're talking about here. As a workplace manager, you can't fix the majority of stressors that people experience. But what you can do is help them get down to the level where they can manage their own stressors and where they can help themselves. Just be sure you don't take ownership of the stressors that you remove from others, because that would be counterproductive. Instead, find reasonable ways to lighten their load until the bucket stops overflowing. I think I know in previous webinars, I've spoken about the difference between eustress, which is what we call good or dynamic stress. It's what gets us up in the morning. And if we love our jobs, it doesn't mean that they're free of stress. It means that we enjoy that type of stress. We enjoy what the job presents to us. That's eustress. And we need that actually for satisfaction and growth. And then there's distress, which is unhealthy and less productive. Sometimes we can even find distress in things that we would enjoy, but there's so many other things coming at us that we need to clear the way so that we can focus in on those things, right? And that would reduce the distress. Can't always be eliminated, but it often can be reduced or limited to a shorter duration. Okay, so here we are. We've got 3 skills out on the table now, right? Start with heart, clarify the gap, reduce the load, which is help others help themselves, right? Now, if we start with heart, we're determining the real intent of our accountability conversation. What do you want for you, for your conversation partner, for your relationship, and for the organization? When we clarify the gap, we identify what kind of conversation we need to have. That is, right, it's either a single instance, it's a pattern, or it's festered into something that threatens the relationship. Next, you explain the gap, starting with facts, then you share your story, and then you ask. You leave room open for curiosity. You leave the door open for inviting your conversation partner to offer their own facts and stories. And then after finding a shared understanding of the expectation and what needs to happen, we can use our 3rd skill to attend to the load. And that's where we can explore what your partner can do to remove obstacles to their success and consider any ways that you might assist. Now, it's time to move to action. Here we are. This is where you establish who does what by when. To encourage accountability, we need to stop finishing our conversations with failed assumptions, sketchy plans, and vague invitations. We need to be very specific. So let's return to the study that I was mentioning earlier near the beginning of the webinar. Nearly 2/3 of respondents in that study indicated that they did not see the by whens. That's the timelines or when is this supposed to be done by, right? They didn't see them as actual commitments. 2/3 did not. Now, why? Why is this happening? Why are we seeing this erosion in a key measure of accountability? And let's dig a little deeper and let's see. True accountability requires agreement and commitment. And sometimes we would mistake that accountability is unilateral. So if we really are looking at agreement and commitment, it acknowledges that accountability cannot simply be assigned or assumed. So as a manager, you can't expect that doling out assignments or placing names on a spreadsheet equates to accountability. Accountability is interactive. It requires dialogue, a shared meaning, and that intrinsic motivation, that real commitment, right, to what's going on here. 85 of the participants in the study that I just was alluding to weren't even sure what their organizations were trying to achieve. The what was unclear. Now, the fallout from this condition, coupled with the lack of clarity around who was responsible for what, resulted in a whopping 93% indicating they felt unable to truly align their work or take accountability for desired results. 93%. That's really problematic. Another telling piece of information revealed that even when the who and the what were defined, it often changed or was convoluted by frequently shifting priorities or other variables that confused the work that they were doing. And none of us ever experience shifting priorities, right? Is it bad news? If you have committed employees and team members, it may be less so bad news. If you have some that are struggling, it might require some effort to unearth, to reveal, and or to pull out that an adequate level of commitment, right? We might conclude that our conversation partners just want to avoid accountability, but believe it or not, that's rarely the case. Research indicates that the vast majority of employees actually desire to be accountable.
You're muted. We can't hear you anymore.
At what point did I lose you here? 91% identified accountability. Let's back up here. Are you good there? They identified accountability as a key development need in their organization. And when they were talking about accountability, they're talking about the kind of accountability that we're talking about today, right? Not punishment. We didn't have 91% people say, 91, or we need more punishment. No, we need more true accountability, more conversation flowing both ways to understand and commit to. 82% said that they either try and fail or avoid accountability altogether. This includes managers. So those are really humbling findings. And I would opine, my opinion is that implementing these skills can really bring down those numbers if you're included in those. So let's take a look at what moving to action might look like in a conversation, right? We have manager, again, manager on the right, and we have David on the left. So let's take a look at what this might look like. Manager says, okay, let's confirm the details. They've already had this the warm-up conversations, right? The supervisor has exercised those first three skills, and now she's laying out who does what by when. Let's confirm the details. You said you can proofread these 2 articles and send the edited documents to me before the end of next week. Is that right? David responds, yeah, I should be able to get it by then, yes. So while clarifying is helpful, what you're really looking for is commitment, right? So when someone agrees to a plan of action, they're more likely to see it through. Even better, when they help clarify the terms of the action, the likelihood increases. Manager says, when do you think you can have the completed edits to me next week? And David says, how about the end of day Thursday? Once you've clarified who is doing what, by when, establish how you'll follow up on what's supposed to happen. And this could happen through a checkup where you make a plan or circle back and check the status of the plan, right? The manager says, shall I shoot you a message Tuesday to see if you have any new thoughts or questions or concerns before the edits are due? David responds, I'll tell you what, I'll let you know after Monday's meeting where I'm at with the edits and if I have any questions or concerns. David has taken on the accountability, the responsibility to get with the manager. The manager simply responds, great. So at this point, the manager has a good indication that there is commitment because David initiated the check-in. The manager is not off the hook. They'll need to jot that who, what, and when down to make sure the agreement is kept and to follow up on it, right? A successful accountability conversation will fizzle out and come to nothing without a plan of action, without the who, what, and when. By stating who does what, by when, and following up, You'll hold others accountable in a helpful, supportive way. So let's finally review the 4 skills we're talking about today. Start with heart, right? Figure out, what is it that you really want? Clarify the gap. What kind of conversation are you having? Content, pattern, or relationship? Tell your facts, share your story, and ask for input. Third skill, reduce the load. How can you help others help themselves, and in what ways can the load be reduced or the stress level be brought at least below the level of that bucket, right? And then finally, move to action. Who does what by when? Those are your 4 skills for today. That's where we'll leave it. And I want to, again, draw your attention to next month, October 29th. The Off the Shelf will be strategic communication. My colleague, Rick Murdoch, will be presenting that. He is a fantastic communication expert, and we are in for a real treat next month. So thank you very much for being with us today. Like I said at the top of the hour, we will be sending these slides out to you. So if there are some things that you wish you had captured along the way, you'll get those. And you'll also get a feed for our YouTube channel and the video of this recording. So thank you very much for being with us today.